You're watching the Global Gambit, everyone. Hello. It's Pyotr here. If you didn't already realize that, you're on my channel, so I'd assume you would do. But we're joined by Alia Brahimi, who is a regular at this point. If you can hear cannon fire outside, that's because I'm in southern Italy and they've just celebrated Santa Maria, which is a celebration of, well, the religion of Catholicism, I suppose. But the southern Italians take that very seriously and not their internet, which is why we're a little bit behind schedule by an hour, because they decided to. Can you hear that?
There it is.
Oh, you can. Okay, good, because it means that I'm not hallucinating. Yeah. So basically, anyone who was, I'm actually a little bit worried now. I'm recording from Dubai or from Tehran or something. But no. So anyway, we were planning to come live at 11, but we're a little bit behind schedule. I do apologize, everyone. But if you join us at this point, that's why. Italy, beautiful, not working. Everyone who's meant to be working the Wi-Fi is actually working the cannons. Alia, it's been, I would say, the best part of a month since we last had a chat. And in that time, we've had an MOU, which has been broken. We've had the best part of 2 weeks of sustained escalation, then a sort of 2, 3, 4 day reprieve from the Americans, only for the Iranians to strike yesterday on Jordan. And a lot of people wondering sort of what triggered the Iranians to do that. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here with you, but sort of what do you make of the sudden choice by the Iranians to reignite the kinetic action there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important part of this, is that they are on this kind of offensive footing. But I think it's, it's a hot moment right now. I think we have to acknowledge, of all of the times that we could have reunited, Peter, I think tonight is quite a febrile one. So you have these kind of expanding fronts. And, as you say, Iran and the US are trading shots, but in third countries. So Iraq and Jordan, potentially Egypt now, it's still not clear, with an LNG kind of storage facility being hit. Yemen and Saudi fighting resumed last week. I'm sure you covered that. Israel and Hezbollah, today escalating in Lebanon again. And then the PMF in Iraq were hit by the Saudis, and, they're looking to respond. So we're currently back inside that pain cave, even though neither side, we assumed that neither side wanted to be in it. But as you say, it's looking that the Iranians might think this is the better option for them. But, the logic of the conflict is sort of taking on a life of its own. And I think that was best exemplified by what President Trump said a couple of hours ago when he said, they hit us, it's our turn now. As though it's just this thing that's like a law of nature. It's happening and no one can control it. But, I think as the number of fronts multiply and the number of belligerents mushrooms, I think it's going to be much harder to get all of the genies back into their bottles. But we can talk about those specific strikes on Iraq if you like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will be honest that it is a little bit distracting trying to have a conversation about Middle East and escalation when you've got people firing fireworks. Just basically, I'm in a small town in southern Italy. Every year around this time, they have this sort of procession on a boat to celebrate the Saint Mary, and it just so happens to be tonight. But it literally sounds like cannon fodder, or like I'm in sort of I'm not in Ukraine, guys. I'm not in the Middle East. As much as that might make my channel more sort of legitimate or something because I'm on the front lines. No, I'm by a bunch of Italians letting loose fireworks, if you can hear that. So apologies for the background noise. But yeah, I mean, look, the headlines today for me were quite reminiscent of the blunderbuster that Trump often endorses. He will impose a heavy price. I think in the morning, when at least US time, he'd said sort of, we will kick the shit out of them or something like that. So how many times can the guy say the same crap in a different way in the same day? All I look at this is quite clearly that the United States is in over its head. It doesn't have a response to the multi-regional war that seems to be occurring now. Okay, yes, the Saudis were part of these strikes on the Iraqis yesterday, but what difference does that make, to the calculus of Tehran? To me, it doesn't, but maybe you know better.
No, I don't think it does. I mean, on the one hand, the Saudis were the most inclined actually to pursue a non-aggression pact with Iran and to kind of de-escalate. But Iran has been alienating them lately, not just with this, but they struck the Prince Salman air base. They were compromising deliberately Saudi Arabia's oil workaround at Yanbu in the Red Sea by activating the Houthi. And then they're exposing the Saudis to this double front vulnerability, attacks from the Houthi from the south and the PMF in Iraq from the north. And then on Monday and Tuesday, actually, the Iranians were launching drones at oil facilities near Riyadh. So, the Saudis couldn't let this stand and go unanswered. But I think what's interesting, on the US side of things, Trump told Fox News that the strikes had been coordinated with the Iraqi government, which felt a little bit unnecessary to me, actually. Already, I had read a couple of days ago a report by Al-Mad'a, one of the Iraqi newspapers, saying that Iraqi intelligence actually fear that there could be an attempt on the Prime Minister Zayd's life if he goes ahead with disarming the militia. So there are extreme sensitivities. So I was surprised that Trump would mention that. But anyway, of course, the Iraqi government denied they had any idea about any of this and condemned those strikes, of course. But the other thing I'll say, Peter, just to what you said, is that the Iranian ballistic missile capability is clearly not degraded, right? Because they can strike across the region, including in Jordan, and even kind of elude those missile defense systems. Maybe not yesterday, but a few days ago they did. And by the way, the US had been redeploying personnel to Jordan for safety to take them farther away from the front line. And yet Iran has been reaching them. And so, Iran, as you said at the top of this, Iran was looking for a surprise attack after a 3-day lull in hostilities. And so the IRGC is very much on an offensive footing. And, I can go into it, but I had a theory about what was going on. And I think what we've seen lately has debunked it.
I'm very happy that you just ended your point then, because the reason I was looking over, that was the most intense, like...
Maybe it was the climax.
No, it seems to be every time we try and have a stream, there's always some exogenous factor or something that sort of makes me look like I'm completely unprepared or poorly ready for this sort of stuff. I might as well just have been in the effing firework. No, it was actually quite scary, to be honest with you. The bangs, like I'm on the no, seriously loud. So I'm glad you were talking and I was on mute for that segment, because for the audience it would have been intolerable. No, I mean, look, from my perspective, it kind of also makes me think about the when we talk about the strategic calculus, or at least that's what I consider it to be, the strategic calculus of the IRGC. The other element that's been so captured the imagination, I think, of a lot of people who aren't experts or whatever, just read the news like, oh my God, the two wars are coming together. When Ukraine strikes this tanker in the Caspian Sea, now I was on the news earlier and they were sort of basically, it was all about this. And I was like, well, it's complete, I've always thought it was complete nonsense. Obviously, is it a big deal? Well, yeah, I mean, it's noteworthy, but is it sort of, everyone's like, oh, the wars are colliding, new intertwined global conflict, America versus Russia is imminent. No, guys, it's not. The Ukrainians and the Iranians have already said we're not going to take this further. But also, like, even if they had done, there's no guarantee. I spoke to Trita Parsi the other day, and whilst I respect him on a lot of things, I firmly disagree with his suggestion, or he was, speculating that the Ukrainians were trying to merge the two wars. It's complete rubbish. What benefit do the Americans have by fighting on behalf of the Ukrainians against Russia, which is sort of what he was suggesting, that the Ukrainians want to pull the Americans in to fight on their behalf, and the Iranians and the Russians sort of band together. And that's not how modern war works. It's not Napoleonic times where sort of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and the Prussians band together to fight against the French and the Piedmontese or whatever, right? It's not ground warfare. We're talking thousands, hundreds of kilometers of distance. Are we really going to see the Russians and the Iranians sort of coordinating command and control centers, logistics, to launch some coordinated set of attacks against the Ukrainians? No. Also, because the Iranians can't. They're doing better than the Americans, I think, relative in the war, right? But why on earth would they waste their munitions, their time, their resources on a war that is of no benefit to them whatsoever? The same with the Russians. Why would the Russians commit resources to a war in the Middle East when they haven't done so already, and also when they can't because of how badly the war in Ukraine is going for Moscow? So this whole idea, I'm sort of sharing my blunt opinions about it. So I'll pass it over to you for you can push back or whatever. But like, I thought it was always nonsense, that this idea that sort of, yes, Ukraine struck the Iranians, but this is more of it was a one-off event, not the beginning of some new tide of warfare. But I'm just curious what you thought about that.
Yeah, it is probably a one-off. I mean, there might be other little events. I think the timing was important. Zelensky probably, it helps him to link the two fronts, because to just attract that more kind of investment from the US side. So it's not something I think that would kind of hurt him. And I think that the Russians have helped the Iranians just like the Chinese have. So it's not, incredible to make that link and make that case. I don't know. I'm sort of, I'm on the fence on that one, because I think that there are, imperatives on both sides. I think that it wouldn't be an overt, as you say, a linked front in a kind of world war. But I think in terms of a covert war, an unconventional war, a hybrid war, a shadow war, both sides benefit from, well, Iran and Ukraine benefit from maybe a more active and invested sponsor by at least the appearance of a link between the stakes in both of the conflicts. But I think, again, it's optics and it's messaging, as you say, more than substance. And so that's why I sit between your position and Trita's. But I will say one thing, Peter, about Iran and what I thought that Iran was doing. So until a couple of days ago, in my head, I had a theory, and that was that Iran had restarted the war in the Strait of Hormuz deliberately to make it all about the Strait and to drown out like the nuclear and missile issues. So I was assuming that they were trying to overwhelm the bandwidth with discussions about the Strait, and it was working. So when they go back and finally talk again, the focus is just on reopening the Strait. There's some kind of face-saving deal for President Trump, and then he cuts and runs. So I was thinking that the Iranians have deliberately bounded the terms of the debate. I thought they were being quite strategic, pushing us closer into midterm territory in the US, so that when an exit route is crafted, it's all about an agreement over the Strait, and the rest about nuclear weapons and everything else is just vague and unenforceable. So that's what I was thinking. But now, as you say, they've got guns blazing everywhere in the last couple of days, including with their long-range missiles, including unprovoked, as you pointed out. So it feels like something else might be going on. So I'm back to the drawing board. Is it that they just don't believe that a deal with the US is possible? As some Irani commentators are saying, they've watched the MOU collapse, even around confidence building measures. None of their assets have been unfrozen, that sort of thing. Immediately, the US started, a kind of Oman workaround for the Straits of Hormuz. And the Trump administration itself seems to be divided. So is it that? Is it that they are trying to take their destiny into their own hands because they feel that there's nothing left, there's no juice left in this lemon, that they have to, is it that they feel that it's a dead end to keep talking and they need to seize the initiative, or are they just broke and desperate and trying to force a conclusion to this to access cash? So I'm in the process of recalibrating my theory, because I thought my original one was quite good. Hadn't shared it with anyone. Glad I didn't.
I appreciate being the place for you to drop your revelations like that. No, look, I mean, just to clarify, I agree with Trita on a lot of stuff, but I think his take on the Ukrainian front perhaps was a little bit overzealous. But then, he's good at building an audience because he's slightly provocative like that. He knows what he's doing, and that's why we have him on as much as we do. But on the other hand, just to clarify my position, as I say, this has literally been in the past 24 hours, right? So around about this time, I was going to bed and I got an update on my iPhone from Al Jazeera or IX or something like that, saying that the Iranians had just launched strikes against Jordan. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then I was like, wait, hang on. The US hasn't done anything for like 4 days. And then I started reading a couple of OSINT accounts that I respect on X, and it's like, yeah, that's actually true. What has triggered this this attack by Iran? And that kind of leads me to the first, not counterpoint, but perhaps difference of perspective, which I think is someone else had put, and I thought about it for a good point, which was this a reaction or a preemptive attack? Because there's a lot of emphasis in the Middle East about, Israel loves the word preemptive. We're going to preempt this. We're going to preemptively strike that. So was the Iranians' argument, we're preemptively striking something because we thought the Americans were going to attack us sort of vibe, right? Mm-hmm. It's a bit weird for the Iranians to just launch an attack on Jordan completely out of the blue when the Americans have been restraining themselves. And the Iranians very explicitly, the Iranians, they like to leverage international law like that and be like, because the Americans haven't attacked us in 3 days, 4 days, we're going to be proportionately under international law, international humanitarian law, proportionality, we're not going to strike back either, right? That was and then they do strike them. So I was a little bit confused by that. And sort of the preemptive argument was like, okay, maybe that's a theory for that. But the other thing that I kind of wanted to, and I'll put it back to you as a sort of more of a question, because you know about this sort of stuff more, which is, how much is this a deliberation or a shift in tone, so to speak, inside the Iranian machine? So we had a chap called Ross Harrison on from the Middle East Institute. Really, really great analyst. Had him on a few times as a senior fellow there. And he really knows his stuff about the internal, maybe I'm sure you know who he is. And he knows his stuff about the literal dynamics between the ultra-conservatists / nationalists, the moderates, the pragmatists, whatever terminology you want to label everyone as. And he was saying that there seems to be a general pivot where the ultra-nationalists have sort of dominated the narrative at this point, that we try to negotiate with the Americans, it's completely pointless. They're going to renege on the commitments. Therefore, the only way, and ultimately this is what we told you, as in this ultra-conservatives is telling everyone else, this is what we told you, the only way the Americans will respond through is force. Is that too simplistic an interpretation, or like, how do you see what's internally going on in Iran?
No, I think undoubtedly the hardliners and ultra-nationalists are massively in the ascendancy. I think that's been one of the biggest outgrowths of the beginning of this war, the decapitation of the first and second layers of the regime. It's only been to empower, the most hardline. I think that's accepted as given. I think that the big conundrum is when they have these civilian negotiators, the likes of Arakshi, who a lot of them used to be, in the IRGC, but are now, representing Iran in a different capacity diplomatically on the global stage, are they negotiating in good faith? Because for about 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know if you remember, or maybe it was a month, the US was saying, look, we're trying to be reasonable with the Iranians, but the regime is split. So the negotiators that come and tell us X, Y, and Z go back, and the hardliners or elements of the hardliners are like, no effing way. And that the civilian interlocutors can make undertakings that the IRGC are not bound by. And that was, and that was a big talking point from the Trump administration, was the Iranians need to get their house in order. And that's why there's been no movement on this. My question was always, are the negotiators, the civilian negotiators, operating in good faith? Or is there an element of collusion? Is this just one big game on the Irani side? And so I part from the crowd a little bit, and there are proper Iran foreign policy process experts, that know much more about this than me. But my instinct was that I think we're giving the civilian negotiators a little too much credit, and I think we're sort of transposing our way of doing things on theirs. And I think that they are more in lockstep, and there is an element of giving negotiators from the US side, the run around a little bit. So it's been always an open question to me, is the regime really as split and dysfunctional as was being presented to us, for the last 6 weeks? And I'm not sure. And I know that one of the talking points that I see from the Irani side increasingly is that the Trump administration is split, and that like Rubio and Vance are on different pages, and that as a result, they can't work out whether any deal that they come to with the US is going to be honored, because there are so many hawks in the regime that could, take Trump's ear and undermine it. So this kind of like lack of regime consensus is an argument that's being used on both sides. And on the Irani side, I'm just not quite sure how to pass it, but I'm skeptical that there is this massive divide.
No, I mean, no, again, just to be clear, like, I don't think there is. I think that this whole emphasis of sort of that there's a deviation of opinion, or divergence of opinions rather, on how to deal with Trump and the whole war is overblown. The unifying factor here has been the war. And that's why I think that, and the point I'm trying to make is, and it's not just Ross, it's FT. There's a correspondent in Tehran from the Financial Times that I listened to, and I spoke to her because I just really loved what she said. Not because it was like the most on point, but because she's on the ground. I just thought she summarized it really well about a month ago. But it's sort of the ultra conservatives, nationalists, whatever, have won the argument in the sense of, look, hey guys, there was this deliberation over like, should we be softer on the Americans? Should we give them a chance? And they've given them a chance, and it's all complete bullshit because of Trump's tackling, Trump's double standards, Trump's retardation, and so they're like, look, guys, we're not going to win through soft power. We're not going to win through decency and diplomacy. We're going to win through not attacking America, not destroying America, or that's what they want to do, but simply through outlasting them militarily. That's my point, which is the differing arguments over how best to win the Americans over is through hardline resilience. And sort of even Pezeshkian, right? I'll put it more bluntly. Pezeshkian has been, someone's like, hey guys, let's not fan the flames. Let's try to retain an open door of potential diplomacy here. And in the past, a couple of months or whenever the MOU failed, he was like, screw you, whatever, fuck it. Excuse me. Like, screw it all. We're just gonna, we're gonna blockade the strait. We're gonna activate the Houthis. We're gonna use hard power and resilience to demonstrate to the Americans that, it's difficult for us. It's tough for Iran, but we can damn well, like the Vietnamese did, like the Afghans did, or the Taliban, like, you can pummel us as much as you like, but we're not going to capitulate, sort of attitude is what I'm trying to get at. So I don't know, again, maybe you disagree with that, but that's what I was trying to get at with that. And I think the activation of the Houthis over the Bab el-Mandeb is kind of illustrative of that. But
It is. No, it is. But the thing about the Houthi and activating them now is that they've played that card already, right? And, I think it was Andreas Krieg that was saying that he expected them to play it much later after the US had escalated against targets inside Iran. And so, I thought that was an important point, whether we agree or not. I think it does draw attention to the fact that, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and this is as someone who said from the beginning that we are now on Iranian territory. They're masters of unconventional warfare. They will win this fight. But even now, I'm looking at it, and their hand isn't as strong as we sometimes assume it is. So we hear that there's a 6-member committee that makes decisions in Iran, or actually alluded to that the other day. In a message that then quickly disappeared offline. But so what I'm thinking about is that the strait is a diminishing asset that over time, and over, quite a short period of time, because nations and industry will find a way to pivot away from it. So I think they can't wave this card in our faces indefinitely. I think that's one thing. Also, we've talked about this a lot, Peter, but the MOU was a good deal for the IRGC. It was promising them cash windfalls, sanctions relief, unfrozen assets, investment, all the conditions that we talked about here, you and I, weeks and weeks before it was announced, because it was the only way. And these were much better starting points than the JCPOA. So even if we accept that control of the strait is like a fundamental sovereign issue for Iran, there's no point in holding on to and grasping and clutching that strategically valuable card if you end up with social and economic collapse at home, right? So you have to be pragmatic. And the other thing is that the tolls that they could charge on the strait, that kind of thing is nothing compared to what sanctions relief would bring. So my point is that their cards aren't infinite, and then their pathway to victory isn't necessarily that clear. One thing I will say is that they do believe that they have a form of escalation dominance, because even a collapse of the regime in Tehran is a disaster for the US and for its Gulf allies in terms of instability, refugee flows, and catastrophe. But that's not a good idea. So even the collapse of the government isn't a good outcome for the IRGC either, literally. So I've just been thinking that all of this, including, being able to chew glass longer than the US and all that, is fraught actually with risk for the IRGC. And that's probably what we don't talk about enough. So, I think that they're burning daylight in a way, and they can't sit on the ladder forever. But that's the Iranian position. So I'm just saying that it's not as strong as we assume, but neither is the US position, which we can go into.
Well, no, I mean, we've got a bit of time here. The fireworks have stopped. I don't feel like I'm on the verge of being invaded or whatever. The door's not about to be taken down by ice.
Well, maybe it's the quiet before the storm, though. So maybe they're amassing to invade.
No, that was me attempting to be dramaticist. Please don't do that. That's terrifying.
It is.
I need to move out of. I'll move to a small island in the middle of the. I don't know. Actually, why would I tell you? No, I mean, no. Look, I think I've interviewed a lot of different people on the show. We've had Larry Johnson, we've had Trita, we've had yourself, we've had very hawkish people. I'm actually in touch with Naftali Bennett's team, which would be absolutely insane, to host the former leader of Israel. The point is that we try to be diversified in who we interviewed. And, the commonality between all of it is that most people agree this war is the most retarded thing since, Trump was elected in 2016. Like, in the sense that this war is complete. What I love about hawks of the MAGA kind is they say, well, we're just gonna, our job, we must make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is kept open and freedom of navigation is preserved against the heresy of the IRGC and Islamic Republic. Well, what did we have before February 28th, Namna? This whole war is so stupid. The war in Ukraine is stupid as well, but it's sort of a bit different because Putin is a ideologue in that way. Whilst Trump he's not an ideologue. He doesn't really give a shit about anything of that degree. He just wants to be on the winning side of, people can watch my latest video of tonight about why the visit with Zelensky is actually potentially beneficial for Ukraine. No, go and watch it, everyone, after this stream. But no, bottom line I'm trying to make is that, like, regardless of who you speak to, apart from perhaps the biggest hawks and neocons of the US, people agree that this is a relative disaster for the Americans vis-a-vis the Iranians. But people hear that and they think, oh, so you support the IRGC, you support the Islamic Republic. No, when did I say that? People are very simplistic in their sense of interpretation of binary issues, or it's very binary, black or white, and it's never like that. So, but I'm leaning the conversation to the sort of the moment of let's criticize the United States, because this entire situation is such an absurdity. I agree with you that the Iranians don't have a big shelf life. Their time horizon or time frame in terms of, they don't have forever to deal to outlast the situation. But I think, again, for me, the window of opportunity for them is longer than the Americans. Or at least I think that the midterms really is a big moment for that. Maybe I'm overzealous on that. Maybe I'm overemphasizing that. But to me, I just don't understand how, and I'll put this to you as someone who's worked across the Atlantic, at the Atlantic Council and others with your professional experience, like, how does someone in Trump's position, how do the Americans try to frame this as sort of something that's sustainable beyond, I've read one analyst who said, oh, it can go until next year. It can go until May next year. No, I'm trying to be balanced in my set of, contributions here, but help me understand, Alia.
Yeah, I think we've talked about the escalation trap a lot. I think you even had Robert Pape on here. It's the administration is very much in the jaws of that. And I think that walking up the escalation ladder with expanded bombing, so even if they do that, that doesn't bring you any closer to getting Iran to back down over the strait, or even forget about a nuclear deal. So I think that disconnect between means and ends is still a problem. And it's probably a strategic kind of cul-de-sac. I don't say strategic dead end, because you can keep going round and round in circles, wasting all your weapons in a cul-de-sac. So, can ground troops force a different outcome? Can it force us out of this predicament? I mean, you'd need congressional approval. You need 100,000 men. There's no mobilization of these assets. Any sign of them that we can see in the US, it would take 6 months. So that's not going to happen. Bombing Pickaxe Mountain, that nuclear material is probably 450 feet under rock. Are you going to even reach it? Unlikely. Iranian ballistic missile capability is alive and well, as I mentioned before. They're showcasing it right now as we speak. So I think that there has to be an acceptance that none of this has worked so far. And the strategy, at least last week, I think was a little bit about throwing good money after bad and hoping for a kind of change in the wind. But meanwhile, as you've just been saying, the US is running low on munitions. Its strategic oil reserves are their lowest in like half a century. So the president's going to struggle to keep oil prices below $100. You could get inflation in the US and recession and all this stuff right as the Republicans are going to stand in a competitive midterm election. Only 1 in 3 Americans back the war. There have been almost 700 troops harmed by the war. And at the same time, the general electorate, not just Democrats, has turned against Israel in the US. And also Trump's own commanders are warning him against escalation. So it's not clear how escalation solves the conundrum of Iran. And so they are going to have to get back to the table. That's just my assessment. But the question is just, how much more darkness and how many tunnels and turns and alleyways are we going to have to go into throughout the region to get back there? And the worry tonight is that, as I say, the fronts are proliferating. Therefore, the number of actors are proliferating. And therefore, that makes that, mano a mano kind of conversation a lot more difficult to arrange.
You did a lot more of an eloquent job of surmising what I was getting at.
Oh, did I?
No, I'm just the fireworks really traumatized me, I suppose, is what it is. But no, quips aside, it's one wonders about the durability of Trump's time, not just in this war, but in power. I mean, his poll percentage at this point has now dropped to the lowest of any president that I'm aware of. Not that I'm intricately aware of every president's polling history throughout the 20th century, but if you look at it relative to even Biden's or Trump in his first term, let alone Obama's, it's cataclysmic. It's like sort of falling off a cliff levels of deterioration. And I think this kind of comes back to what we said in our previous conversation, if I remember correctly, which is simply, at least to me, it's just a tug of war between one man's ego and an entire system, a regime's survival. And whilst one of them may be a very big ego, to me, this is a pretty clear one-sided case, right? It's not, one has to give, and the Iranians are not going to give. This is what their entire system, the entire regime is built on. This is their doomsday scenario, that they fight the Americans in a war to the end, quote unquote. So, it's just a matter of time that Trump tries to find a get out. But what is bizarre is that his short-termist vision or memory over the MOU is like, can't stand it. Let's go back to war. And now we've just had a rather, I don't know how to say, nebulous, ambiguous meeting with Netanyahu, who in himself has an election that he must win, otherwise face indictment again. Can Netanyahu somehow persuade Trump to go back to even heightened war? You know, I'm not pretending to know here, but I do worry about the potential for a significant escalation, especially as we leave the summer. It gets relatively cooler in the Middle East. Things change again. Could we see a genuine commitment like, we can take Kharg Island, we can take areas of Iran that require limited, at least we're promised a limited military operation on the ground? This is stuff that I would have thought was preposterous, but because of what Trump's facing in the midterms, I just don't know. And I'm not a scaremonger. Anyone who watches my channel, anyone who follows me or follows you, I mean, you wouldn't be on my show if you thought I was a lunatic, like, World War III tomorrow. But I do genuinely worry about this, right? Am I talking out of like, is it absurd what I'm saying, or is what do you think?
No. I think what you're saying is right, but I don't think it's about ego anymore at all. I think it's about the logic of the war, as I said at the beginning, but also the logic of deterrence and the fact that when an adversary hits you, you have to be seen to be hitting back. And so as a result, you can't take these decisions, all things being equal, or in the warm, light of day. And that's the problem, is that, as I say, the conflict develops, a logic of its own. But the one thing is that, certainly in recent weeks, since the collapse of the MOU, I personally think that the solution is actually quite clear. And I think it is so there is a way out, but the guns sort of have to fall silent, and Iran forcing this latest round, hasn't helped. But the US has done that in the past. But hopefully it was just a gambit on their part to maybe reflect that they can give as good as they get, and that they can decide at what hour they strike and at what hour they defend themselves. It could be that that's what's happening. But ultimately, I think the collective management of the Strait is probably the only way out of this. So I don't know if you heard about the negotiation. Well, Iran and Oman are currently exchanging proposals about splitting management of the Strait. That's been going on. Oman proposed a 50-50 split. You're very skeptical, but it really is, to my mind, the only face-saving way out of this. And I'll tell you why. They're looking in the right place, in my view, because I've heard from Gulf sources that Iranian control of the Strait is an absolute red line for them. Why? Because that would mean that Iran ultimately decides which products get through, and they can use all kinds of either coercive or bureaucratic reasons to leave some shipments to rot in the sun, and let others through that they prefer and that they privilege, and just looking at them the wrong way can cause them to just pause all of your trade. So, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, they cannot live this way. Their customers will flee. So I do believe that a new kind of collective authority with Iran and Oman or other Gulf states managing the straits is the way out, with Iran taking a cut. So Iran is monetizing the strait without exercising absolute control over it. And I think that's how you would split the difference on this problem. And this incentive for Iran, why would they do this, you might ask? And I think it would be the money. And maybe there's a way of cutting this, that they receive more of the environmental or management fee without more of the control. So, that's one way out. I think it's probably, to my mind, the only way out. And the sooner we get back to, in terms of like quick off ramps, the sooner those discussions, we get back to those, the more Trump can not cut and run, but certainly wind down and claim at least a partial kind of victory, even though no one will have forgotten that the status quo ante, where Iran had no control whatsoever over the strait, was obviously infinitely better. But I think, we should say that also, meanwhile, inside Iran, the economy is terrible. Inflation is rampant, execution of young people, it's devastating. These beautiful young people are being executed. That's ramping up. So I think whatever arrangement that's made now with the regime, there will be turbulence inside Iran eventually, and the file will reopen. But there's some kind of accommodation is needed now. Otherwise, this could all slip out of everyone's control. There are so many directions this can escalate in, and we don't want to go down that road. The US doesn't have the weapons to go down this road either, if that's the only factor. So I don't know what you think about.
No, I mean, look, I have a few things to say. Firstly, housekeeping. Yeah. Guys, I don't put ads on streams. So if you've got ads on your YouTube, also, if you don't like ads on YouTube, just pay for YouTube Premium. I'm tired of people saying to me, don't put ads on it. I don't. So to some of you in the comments saying that, just, hold your tongue, probably best. Second, I mean, look, I think that the Americans, this is a distinction here in how the West looks at costs of lives, cost of warfare versus other countries, perhaps Putin, in lives lost. Russia's losses to date now outpace all of America's losses bar World War II, or since World War II combined. So, when we talk about the Americans, do they have the capacity to deal with Iran? Well, they do if they just forego any limitations of anything, right? If America just wants to fling every single thing they want at the problem, of course they could take Iran, right? But this is a scenario that is completely absurd. We don't operate in the degrees of absurdity. We operate within the degrees of rationality and what's the word? Relative limitations. So that's sort of ridiculous. As for the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, look, this whole thing, as I said, and you just reiterated, this whole thing is non-existent. If this war didn't start in the first place, is the Islamic Republic the worst thing? Yes, I hate it, but the Strait of Hormuz was not a toll booth before Trump decided to undertake this stupid fucking war beforehand. So now we live in this new reality, which is that somehow this strait of water is going to be monetized. Now, in my scenario, whatever, my idealistic scenario, outside of it just being free passage, it would be a multinational administration or administered multinationally, right? So the Gulf states, Iran and Oman maintain it, right? Everyone lives in harmony. There's a degree of understanding, the things are split evenly, or perhaps, 20% Iran, 20% Oman, and then 10% the Gulf states, or whatever. Whoever has to build the infrastructure, do the actual maintenance of the strait, if you want to be that pedantic about it, right? But that's never going to happen. And this is why the war is also why I think the strikes with the Saudis now on Iraq is quite interesting, because from my understanding, the Saudis have been working behind the scenes to not normalize relations, but maintain a degree of, to your non-aggression pact is what you said, right? Non-aggression pact with the Iranians, right? Well, that seems increasingly difficult now, especially as the Iranians activate the Houthis and so on. So now we live in this scenario where the Iranians have this understanding with the Omanis, although it's tense because they threatened the Omanis a couple of times. I mean, you mentioned the Iranians and the Omanis have been working on this sort of, arrangement for the Hormuz Strait.
Well, yeah.
But it's been happening for 4 months. I think the first time we ever spoke, there was sort of the Omanis have suggested their own line of passage, and then the Iranians struck a boat, and the whole thing was like, no, you're not going to do that unless we tell you, Omanis. So the Iranians are pretty, I think the trigger point is the Hormuz, right? They're ready and willing to work with or coordinate with the Gulf states, Omanis, on most things, but not the Strait of Hormuz. They want overall say on, it's like, ownership of a company. They want 51% of that company, i.e. the Strait of Hormuz influence, I think. But just to sort of summarize this as a sort of redirection to you, escalation. You mentioned Professor Paup. Respect for him and anyone else I've had, but I feel like escalation is the word of the year, because we've got horizontal escalation, vertical, diagonal. I've had a glass of water that's escalated the sparkling water in my stomach. Now, it's getting escalatory. I'm being slightly facetious. My point is that sort of
I caught
how
that.
far can escalation go? But like, sort of, it's a bit of an arbitrary term, right? Sort of the media just like, oh, the US and Iran escalated today. Did they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, sort of, but the circumstances, escalation, in my understanding, as a pedantic Brit, means that you take something to a new level and it
Yeah.
retains that level. But we aren't escalating; we have flare-ups, right? Because if we were at an escalation level that was continuously ascending, then we'd somehow be a nuclear apocalypse at this point. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, as a YouTuber and podcaster, I have to do my bit of saying, oh, scary now, everyone, you've got to click through. This is worse than you thought, sort of bullshit. But point I'm making is like, if this is escalation, Alia, what DEFCON are we at? Is it horizontal escalation? Is it vertical? Like, what's happening here?
Well, it's both. I think horizontal, encapsulates the fact that this is spreading and new fronts are opening. But vertical, I think the reason why people were talking about it a lot 10 days ago was this kind of promise by Trump, essentially, obviously not briefed on the law of armed conflict, but openly saying that he was going to be hitting civilian and energy targets inside Iran. And that would be a massive escalation. And they did walk up that ladder a little bit, but pulled back. But then Iran escalated as well by hitting deliberately a desalination plant in Kuwait. So I think it's the targets, the type of targets, which then make it harder to climb back down. I think that's one of the meaningful ways that term is used. But I take your point that it's overused. But I think just the implications. Okay, let's just talk about. So that's escalation within the conflict itself. But I think the implications of this war, they just keep growing, because now we have a potential, nuclear arms race, maybe, with this kind of permissive US-Saudi deal. I don't know if you covered that on the podcast, but there's this nuclear deal between the US and Saudi Arabia that came out a few days ago. And then, has since been
no, please, please unpack that. That's actually really good. That you reminded me of something I wanted to ask you. So no, what's your take on that?
Oh, really? So did you cover it already on the podcast? So it was this 30-year-old. Sorry, it was this 30-year agreement. Now the US and Saudi have been in talks about this for a while. These talks accelerated in April after the war started. And so they've come to this 30-year agreement for civil nuclear purposes. So the US would share technology and help the Saudis build this nuclear kind of infrastructure. But what happened was that it dropped the gold standard safeguards that you'd normally expect in this kind of deal. So comparably, everyone's holding up the deal with the UAE in 2009 that said you must not enrich uranium ever. You cannot reprocess atomic fuel, and you have to have these rigorous IAEA inspections. So these clauses were not in this deal with Saudi Arabia. So there's genuine worry over future warhead development, that the Saudis could use the civil nuclear program to eventually enrich uranium and end up with a warhead, particularly if they're trying to balance against Iran. But then also this deal seemed to undo decades of US Western counter-proliferation policy. So if you are going to allow the proliferation of this type of material, can Russia and China now offer nuclear technology to their partners and allies, since we've set the precedent? So that's another worry. And then also there's just the kind of like awkward reality that the war in Iran is ostensibly about preventing nuclear proliferation, right? It's about preventing it, stopping it in Iran. So in the same breath, the US appears to be enabling or supporting proliferation in the Middle East. And then the final thing is that Israel was horrified. It wants to remain the only nuclear power in the region. Trump then said, a day later, probably in response to Israeli outrage, that, we're only going to go through with this deal if the Saudis come onto the Abraham Accords. Obviously, that's a non-starter for Saudi. Even then, I think the Israelis would have a big problem with it. So I think it might be stalled anyway. And the Saudis were blindsided by the Abraham Accords thing. Congress would have to look at it, etc. But this raised, the fact that could be one of the outcomes of this war, just one of the many, I think was a real red flag. And it just shows that the longer this goes on, the more things are going to recalibrate and alliances will deepen and shift, and there'll be structural change. There's the potential for all this structural change, not necessarily towards, safeguarding lasting peace or expanding the circle of peace, as the Israelis call their policy in the region.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to those of you who've dropped a sort of like super thanks, whatever you call it, like thank you for that. We do these streams quite often, and Alia, I think it would be good to do this on a weekly basis if there's enough to talk about. But like, I really enjoy the dynamic, and I think people do as well. So yeah, let's try and figure that out if you're interested. But yeah, I mean, on the Saudi front, I mean, look, are you not conflating slightly civilian use development with nuclear proliferation? Or am I being deliberately naive and thinking that they
No, not at all. No, I'm not conflating it. It's that's the stated purpose is obviously civil, but without safeguards, it could potentially become, kind of weaponized. And there's a reason those safeguards weren't put in, right? It was the most glaring aspect of the deal. Why not have them in? So whether by design or not, it does touch off a potential for a nuclear arms race in the region if it went ahead. It's a very permissive nuclear deal. I think that's accepted. It's widely interpreted as such. So I think that would be one of the big things that has come out of this war. Another one is just the cost. It's been $37 billion we heard the other day, and then the defense secretary asked for 70 billion more. I think there's also this precedent that's been set by, a war of aggression, if that's not too editorialized, but I think factually it is. And then also the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the impact on freedom of navigation. So, I'm just listing a whole bunch of outcomes. Also, Egypt and Turkey, by the way, they're now friends again, and they're expanding their industrial ties and all this stuff to balance Israel. Meanwhile, the US might sell F-35s to Turkey. Israel and Turkey are primed for a showdown, particularly over Syria. So, there's that. There's in time, yes. If the Israeli strategic footing doesn't change, I think in time, yes.
What is in time in this world we live in now, Alia?
I think they have to disentangle. Exactly. I mean, I think they don't want another front right now and that sort of thing. But I think that the Israeli national security establishment sees Turkey as a pacing threat. And I don't think that that's going to go away. But there's also a debate, I should say, I was looking in the Jordanian press and about whether US military bases are worth it, whether they attract more harm than good on Jordanian soil. Other countries are probably internally having that debate as well. But then beyond the region, I think we have to never lose sight, Peter, of the effects, the cascading effects beyond the region. Malnutrition and poverty amongst children in Nigeria, for example, has soared. The bond between government and citizen has been stressed in Bangladesh, in the Philippines, in Vietnam, just over this access to fuel. China is now seen more favorable globally for the first time ever than the US. That was a Pew poll that came out a few days ago. The first time ever. This all is a result of this war. And I think that, arguably, you could say that US deterrence is potentially eroding, given its low missile and munition inventory, its kind of inability to get the job done in Iran or even to kind of follow through on very public threats. So what I'm saying just is that the longer this goes on, the more cascading consequences I think we'll see. And many of that cannot be undone.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm aware of the soft power index that came out a couple of weeks ago. The Americans are now the 5th most unpopular nation, outpacing that of the Russians and the Chinese. The Americans have also dipped below the Chinese in another poll, which I think is the one you were referencing from Pew Research Center.
Yeah, it was Pew.
I get it. Yeah, the ramifications, spillover effects of this war are only beginning to be felt, I think, now. The thing about the Saudi nuclear element, if we focus on that just as a sort of to keep it sort of refined, is what's interesting is this strategic. I keep coming back to this strategic partnership that they signed with the Pakistanis in November. I remember covering that on the channel, and it got like 120,000 views. And I was like, what the hell? Because I just sort of thought it was interesting and posted it. But everyone was like, wow, this is a big deal. And it's like, I think it is the basis of this redistribution of the balance of power, because the Pakistanis are being brought in by MBS and Riyadh to train Saudi soldiers, but also to take up security positions in ways that the Saudi national forces are capable of. And that includes nuclear potential facilities. So sort of, if the Americans are going to give the Saudis the capacity to develop a civilian nuclear program, Pakistan's a nuclear capable power. So would the Pakistanis sort of advise the Saudis on how to develop a nuclear weapon? Because the Pakistanis have also had a decent relationship with the Iranians over, helping them to keep some of their weapons on the Pakistani soil to avoid American strikes in the past few months. All I'm getting a sense of is sort of no one seems to be best mates in the Middle East. Everyone seems to be backstepping a little bit, or there's a lot of like, I'll do you a favor, or do you a favor. Erdogan has always been on the periphery with his new Ottomanism and desires to sort of reshape the Middle East under Turkish sort of influence. I know everyone's like, no, definitely not. I remember when he suggested that Turks could be peacekeepers for Gaza in the first month for half a year of the October 7th. Absolutely no way. The Middle East going to do that. The Gulf states agreed to that. So, yeah, it just sort of Trump, I guess you're right that the dissolution of America's influence or deterrence effect is leading to a complete clusterfuck, in the Middle East. Everyone's vying for power. No one seems to have the overarching capacity to influence. What used to be a binary competition for hegemony between the Iranians and the Saudis is very much distributed now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know where it goes. And we're still not in a clear direction of how it goes, because this war is not over yet. And only until it is over do we have a clearer sense of where that underlying balance of power really lies. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it's such a mess.
Yeah.
And I worry about what this implication of this deal with the Americans, which I think a lot of military analysts have overlooked, whilst economists have been like, or energy economists are like, this is a big deal. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, to wrap it up, I guess, because it is, I could talk for another hour if you want, but we've been talking for an hour. Like, what would you, if we reconvene next week, what would you encourage people to watch? What should we be watching in the next few days?
Well, I think whether there is going to be a drive from the White House to de-escalate. I don't know if you don't like the word escalate. I wonder if you also anathematize the word de-escalate. But whether
I don't mind the word escalate. I just think it's utilized now. That's all. So it will be interesting to see what the rhetoric is coming out of the White House with regard to the peace talks. I think Trump even suggested today that they were still on the table because they need them. They need them, right? And I think the Iranis always deny that they're happening. They're probably engaged in them. But now that the Saudis, the Gulf states, the UAE have even been using their own drones. Bahrain also, the Saudis as well, have taken part in operations against Iran probably over the course of this conflict. But the fact that the Saudis are going in with both feet, was that just to slap back, the militia in Iraq and to reestablish that deterrence in a sense? Or is it that their position has changed entirely and they feel that, they've got to go in hard now? They've given them enough leeway and they're going to have to fight this to the death with Iran. My instinct is the former, but I think that's one to watch, the Saudi posture and Saudi messaging, because they have been a very important force for de-escalation as well. Also watch what on earth, the final assessment about what happened in Egypt with this tanker being hit and whether that is connected to the Iran war. As we came on air, it just wasn't clear at all. So that would represent obviously a huge expansion if it was. And the problem is there are a number of fronts to watch, but I think focus on the center and the language about whether the US still feels that it's acceptable, advisable
wise to talk about talking, because I think as soon as that stops, we're in trouble, because the inner logic of this could scatter. It's like a cluster munition, the war, it could scatter in many directions and take in a number of countries, fronts, armed groups. But I think that's well understood now. Well, I would hope so, within the White House, and that's an eventuality that they don't want. But again, we've learned so far, we've learned over the course of these 5 months that wanting something is very different from being able to achieve it when you don't decide. And that's what the Iranians have been saying all along. You don't decide, we decide when this is over. So that was particularly helpful, but it's very late.
No, I mean, I'm just being told by those watching us that there's a live round of strikes, apparently. Hang on, let me just double check her on X, because that's the best place for it. But we're seeing, what these two exports have reported in Nurabad, Fars region. That's according to one friend of mine. I don't know if you're getting any updates on that.
Okay.
Yeah, reports plotted in southwestern Iran. Multiple heard in Nurabad, Iran, moments ago. Yeah, reports of an American strike on the Iranian port of Sirek, which is just, it's right in the hub of the Strait of Hormuz, just south of Bandar Abbas.
God.
I mean, look, this is. I'm not surprised, in the sense of Trump promised strikes today. The Iranians struck Jordan yesterday, which I don't really understand why they did that. My idea of preemptive strikes doesn't make sense, because the Americans didn't and do it. This is a response. Trump promised these responses. It's not going to change the bottom. The last point I would make, simply, great analysis, much more, I think, adept than mine, is simply, I think we sort of lose the forest for the trees. I was in a debate about this on the news about 3 weeks ago, and people were like, oh, there's been another explosion here, what weapons have been utilized. This is a demonstration of the capabilities of ex-military battalion and so on. Sure, relevant, important to understand the operational capacity of your military, but I focus on the strategic level, because ultimately another strike by a ship or another strike on X amount doesn't change the strategic momentum or trajectory that one side has or the other side doesn't. The same with the war in Ukraine. Right now, yes, is the war in Ukraine looking tough for the Ukrainians night after night? Yes, but you have to zoom out and look at the fact that they are controlling the situation in Crimea. The Russian economy is on absolute disaster. Putin's political stamina is running out. And it's the same with the war in Iran. Trump has a shorter shelf life than the Iranians do. The Iranians aren't short of issues, as Alia has very clearly put out, but at the strategic level, no strikes that the Americans make tonight is suddenly going to make the Iranians go, oh my God, Trump, we need to please. That's not going to happen. So, I've kind of stopped paying attention after March, because the intensity of strikes stopped, and the blockade, as important as it is in military combat, is not that effective unless it's leveraged alongside ground operations and air force. So we talk about these things, but ultimately this war is not going to end tomorrow. It's going to continue. Oil prices will go up, they'll go down, short selling will happen. And we'll be back with Alia, I think, is the most important point to end on. We'll be here
sure, I'm happy to do that.
The next day, the next week, we'll be all around. So lots of people really want to follow you, by the way. You should start your own YouTube channel, as well as your Substack.
What would I do on this YouTube channel, though, guys? What would I do? Just chat. Yeah.
I'll post to everyone. Go and check out the video where I spoke for 15 minutes. I didn't post any information. I just posted a video of me talking about, I'm trying to find the right one. Yeah. So the real reason MAGAs are suddenly supporting Ukraine. And that's me talking for 15 minutes and 29 seconds about why Laura Loomer's visit to Zelensky and Ukraine was actually more of a big deal than you thought. And 100,000 of you have watched that.
Really?
So that's why you should, Alia, because if you know how to
pause without, it's like all these media interviews I do, but it's without the inconvenience of a question, right? So I just kind of like, I say what I want to say, and then afterwards I say, I said what I said.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, you know, what's the expression they say? Tell people what you're going to tell them what you're telling them, and then tell them what you told them, or some bollocks.
I'm learning
yeah,
the master.
no, you should start a YouTube. I think it would be really good for you. Everyone, do check out Alia's podcast as well, Guns for Hire, which is available on Substack as well as the Atlantic Council website, or anywhere you get your podcast.
It is. But then the other thing that I started was a Substack, which I haven't done much with at all, but as I mentioned before, called Highly Irregular. So yeah, I've got my little Substack as well. You know, I've said before I don't love social media, but if you, yeah, I mean, I'll take tips, certainly. But don't tell us what you told us actually means. That's a suggestion from one of your viewers. Very good. What's happened? Oh, is this, I think your internet connection's down. This is my cue to leave. Or maybe you just cut me off. Okay. All right. Well, good night, everyone. Good night, everyone. I think either I've been kicked out or Pyotr, one of the cannons, got
Okay, guys, and sorry about that. I don't know what happened. The stream is good for an hour. Suddenly that happens, but anyway, as I was saying, go and check out Alia's Substack, Guns for Hire, and her other one that she was explaining to me, yeah, it was a really good, if you, what's the name of her Substack? I don't even know the name of her Substack. Hang on. That's really annoying. I was streaming. What I was trying to say to Alia was that we have her Substack attached to the Substack. So you guys will be able to find it immediately. But yeah, it was a really good chat. And Alia Brahimi, wait, hang on. Let me find her bloody Substack. Now I'm invested in this. Also because she's been incredibly supportive of the show. We were meant to go live. What is happening with this fucking Wi-Fi? Wow. Oh, okay. There's a black screen. See, this is how bad the internet is. It's literally showing two parts of me. Thanks, guys, for watching. Ali's podcast are Guns for Hire and Highly Irregular. Apologies for the internet connection. Don't come to southern Italy. There's a reason why Churchill called this place the soft underbelly of Europe. As much as I want to love it, I've been coming here for many years. It's appalling, the internet and everything. So anyway, thanks very much for those of you who continue to support the show. Really appreciate you. We've got a couple of big guests. We've got General H.R. McMaster, coming on next week. We've got David Petraeus at the end of August, and we've got a very special, well, something big with Sarah Payne is coming up. So those of you who know me from my interview with Sarah at the beginning of the year, watch out for the fall's going to be interesting, put it that way. Now, some of you go on holiday, enjoy your August, but we'll still be active here. It's slower for us on the internet sometimes, but yeah, we'll be streaming, we'll be busy, and yeah, keep a lookout for it. But yes, Italian internet in southern Italy, south of Naples, disaster, part of the world, beautiful, food incredible. If you ever come down here and you want recommendations, I have plenty, but to try and work or do anything of a productive nature, beyond capacity. But thanks a lot, everyone. Wish you all the best. Speak soon. Support Alia. Take care.